Hello, and welcome to ShopTalk, the podcast built to unlock union strength through collaborative discussion. Our aim is to have a naturally flowing conversation on relevant union issues, events, and topics. Thank you for joining. Hello, and welcome to Shop Talk. I'm your co-host, Frank Perry.
Hey, it's Robert Bass.
We're happy to have a few people joining us today. I believe Cindy Doyle will be joining us, as well as our newly elected Vice President, David Jimenez. So welcome to them as well.
Welcome as well. And we will have a few people strolling on in as we go along. Since we are live today, we are going to cover a number of topics. We are going to cover the board meeting that just happened this last Wednesday, June 2nd. We are also going to cover the side letter negotiations, elections protests, telework a little bit, and stewards and laps if we get to it. So that's a little overview of what we got going on. You got anything to add, Frank?
No, that sounds good.
So let's jump on into it. So as many people are aware, we had a board meeting, an emergency board meeting called for June 2nd. We reviewed a number of issues related to that last week's episode. And this week, we're just going to do a quick recap of the board of directors. We do have a few other people on the call with us right now who are at the board meeting as well. So feel free to chime in if at any point if I'm missing anything. But the board of directors happened at 6 p.m. It happened over a call, a telephone call, teleconference call, rather than Zoom like it normally takes place. The call started a little after 6 because people were rolling in slowly. And from there, we had a quick little summary. Yvonne, kicked the meeting off. Apparently, and I didn't catch this at the beginning, and so I'd be interested to see if other people caught it or not. But I guess at the beginning, Yvonne mentioned that there would be no point of order or point of information allowed at the meeting. When that came up later on, when the parliamentarian referenced that. So that was a new thing that I wasn't familiar with either, and I'm not quite sure is even allowed. But she did say that there would be no point of orders, I guess, or points of information. She then went straight into, the amendment from Stephen O'Leary. And as we recall from last week, that was to oppose the Governor Newsom's recall and to give $1 million into SEIU California, basically to fight the recall. Soon as his amendment was read, I was called on next. I happened to get into the queue very early and proposed an amendment to his proposal. And my amendment was that we maintain no position for right now on the recall and that we don't give any money. And I thought that was important. And there was a number of people who thought that was important so that, and it was a wide variety of people, not necessarily people who want the governor recalled, more so that, hey, let's take this moment in our history. Let's take a step back from having a position right now. We currently, and if you see how that was worded, maintain no position, because we had no position before. There was no reason for us to come and take a position in right this second, in my opinion. And so I proposed that amendment, and I basically eliminated or scratched the money portion. I know previously it was talked about that the money portion might be something that we could switch to the strike fund or something like that. I decided it was best to leave that out for now. And so then debate kind of started. So people who came after me started debating the position, whether we should take a position, we shouldn't, money, etc. And in the normal, I guess, disingenuous nature of some of our board members, there was a lot of stump speeches that came up. So basically, even though I suggested we scratch the money portion and I didn't make any mention of us doing anything with $1 million, there were still several disingenuous people who just read off a piece of paper that said, hey, this $1 million is illegal. You're breaking the law by trying to give it to a strike fund when it's earmarked for this certain thing. And those were all obviously just pre-written stump speeches that had nothing to do with what I actually proposed. And so those kind of went on for a little bit. We had a decent, amount of passion coming out, and a lot of people in the queue ready to talk. And then Jerome Washington, who is on the board, called all matters before the House, which is a procedural motion that basically then says, hey, anything that we got going on, anything there's up to be voted for should be voted on now. And so that would have been the original proposal plus the amendment. And so he, in some ways, he has every right to call that, but also it does go to silence a lot of voices who are waiting to speak on the issue. It does go up for a vote. We had a vote of the board, and that vote came down to the very, very, very last vote. And so I think it needed, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it needed 38 votes in order to have the 2/3 or the 3/4 majority needed. And it was that 37. Yvonne was the very last vote. And so, of course, she voted yes to end the discussion. And so after that passed, we then just had a series of roll call votes in order to, vote on the proposal, vote on the original proposition. We exercise those roll call votes. So if you're listening, those have been posted. A couple people took the roll. I believe Kevin Menninger did as per his duty. Cindy Doyle as well took the roll, and has been published, a couple places online by Luke Cerna as well, who's a new incoming DLC president. So if anyone watching wants to know how their people voted or their DLC president, how anyone else did, both on all the issues, not only the issue, of backing Gavin's recall and the $1 million, but also I personally think more importantly on the issue of, silencing people's voices and allowing discussion to continue. And so that's available if anyone wants it. We had the roll call vote at the end. One of the board members mentioned before, our current vice president, tried to split the amendment, and that was ultimately unsuccessful as ruled by the parliamentarian, because not only was it out of order given the rules that Yvonne created, but also the fact that when you split an amendment, the two parts that are split have to operate independently. And as written, if we were to split it, the second part couldn't happen unless the first part, was passed. And so essentially the first part of the sentence was, let's oppose the recall. The second half of the sentence was give $1 million to, SEIU California to oppose the recall. And so if we would have voted, down the first part, there's no way we could have voted up the second part without it contradicting. Therefore, the split wasn't allowed. And that pretty much ended the meeting. Everything got wrapped up, and the end result is that my amendment failed. Stephen O'Lary's amendment passed. And so the board voted to go ahead and oppose the recall of Governor Gavin Newsom and to give $1 million to fight his recall effort. So that's kind of the breakdown on that. Is there anyone on the call who did I miss anything? Was there anything important I left out about the board meeting? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add to that, Frank.
No, I thought that was pretty good explanation of the events and very concise, laid out what exactly happened at the board meeting in case you missed it and what the ultimate result of it was.
So yeah, that's where we're at now as a union. That kind of covered the board meeting, the emergency board meeting that we just had. The next scheduled board meeting, I believe, is the June 26th weekend, 27th, if that's a weekend. My dates might be off because I don't have a calendar in front of me. But that last weekend in June should be where they swear in the new officers and all of that. And then we'll also see whether or not we either add to that meeting or have another, emergency meeting, depending on, what happens with the election protest period. So yeah, that covers the board meeting that we just had on June 2nd. And so now we'll hand it over to Frank to get into the side letter negotiations.
So as Robert said, we really wanted to give an overview of what's went on this last week. A lot of big news for the union. And after covering what went on at the board meeting, we want to get into the side letter negotiations. So I know when we're talking about numbers and things like that, it can be kind of difficult for people who are more visual learners. So I'm going to share my screen and share a write-up of what the end result of the side letter negotiations and the recent bargaining update. So let me share that screen. Okay, so here's the recent bargaining updates. Here's basically the things that were agreed upon between the state and our union at the most recent negotiations. So the first one we see here at the top, we see that the PLP days are going to be ending, and they will now be a part of each employee's bank time for each employee to use at their discretion. So you're not going to be told by your department or your HR that you have to use that before vacation or before other bankable time. So now it's just going to be in your bank and you can use it when you'd like to. Along with that PLP ending, obviously those 2 days a month did take the place of a 9.23% pay cut, and that pay cut will also be ending. The third point here is that we're going to be seeing a general salary increase of 4.55%. And I wanted to show you the breakdown here. The 2.5% of that is going to be the 2020 contract increase that we agreed to and never got last July. 2% is going to be from the 2021 contract increase that we had prior agreement to have take place this July. And that brings us to 4.5. But what they also did is that they added 0.05%, and that is not something that was given to us by the state. This is to account for the amount that the two raises would have compounded if given separately. So I want to make it clear that this is something that we would have had the state given us our prior 2.5% contract increase. So the GSI is going to be overall 4.55%. The fourth point we see here is that OPEB or OPEB, which we've been told is retirement healthcare funding, and a little bit more on that in a minute, but that is going to be coming back, and it is going to be a 3.5% decrease. I want to note here, because there's some misunderstanding of OPEB, and a lot of people are saying, we've been paying into that. Well, we've been partially paying into that. Previously, we'd been paying 2.3% into OPEB. The final 1.2 never took effect because that was going to take effect during the 2020 contract year. So overall, the OPEB that's going to be reinitiated is going to come in at a 3.5% decrease. Also, we were told that the state was going back to the bargaining table and that essentially everything was on the table that could maybe stay or go. So we're also reporting that the healthcare stipend of $260 monthly, which of course we know is taxed at a bonus level. So I think it's taxed at 40% or so. That's gonna come back. That's gonna stay on the table. And actually there's an expansion of the healthcare stipend will continue through June 2022. And the original healthcare stipend provisions will continue until the length of the contract of June 2023. So overall, we're looking at a GSI of 1.05%.
And the way we get this, the methodology behind this is that everything on this list operates as either an increase or a decrease to our pay. So the 9.23% comes back, we get a GSI of 4.55, and then the OPEB, which, as we know, everything was on the table to either go away or come back. It was all up for negotiation. That came back as well as a cut. So the GSI, and the most genuine way of putting it, is at 1.05%. So there's a couple of asterisks here we want to kind of discuss, and Robert may want to jump in on some of these. Feel free to, Robert, if you'd like. But the one asterisk is on the OPEB, and we've been told that the OPEB is a retirement health care fund, but Robert and I've kind of spoken to different stewards and spoken to people in the union, and we really
there just doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity there.
Yeah.
And so we, when it first came out and we were in talks about whether we were going to contribute to OPEB or not, a few years ago, it was kind of couched as, hey, if you're vested into something, so if you pay into something, it can't be taken. And so it was phrased in such a way and marketed in such a way that it was like, hey, right now we don't pay into our retiree healthcare, which was mind-blowing considering all the things that we pay into. But somehow we weren't paying into it, that it was kind of a gift to us that could be taken away. And so the reason why we wanted to start OPEB and why we wanted to be involved in it was so that we could be vested into the retiree healthcare so that it could no longer be taken away. But then as time went on and we got closer to OPEB and, more details come out, it's now clear, and this is weird, it's clear that it's unclear to a lot of people exactly what it is, because some people still have that original understanding. Some people understand it as a separate fund, basically, a place where we're accumulating a ton of money that can then be used to pay for people's retiree healthcare in the future. And other stewards yet have an understanding that it's actually a legal fund that is being created in order for us to be able to pay legal fees if a time were ever to come where our retiree healthcare was ripped from us, that we could fight back using those legal fees. And then yet still other people are confused why we do it at all, because there seems to be a potential conflict of interest between retiree healthcare, our own retirement, Medi-Cal, and Medicare, and all the other programs. And so we have an asterisk just because we're not 100% clear. We have to do more research and talk to more people on exactly what it is, considering there are all of these different opinions and thoughts and insights onto what it is on a lot of the people that we trust around the union. And so we definitely are going to plan on doing a future episode about that, and hopefully can get more people in more information, where we can exactly lock down what exactly is the OPEB for and what do we get out of it. And so we just wanted to say, hey, we are aware a lot of people are talking about what this is and isn't, and we can't clear it up for you 100% right now. Personally, but neither of us feel comfortable without doing more research. And so we do want to have a future episode on that issue. And so that's kind of why we have asterisks around it. And I do see that Cindy has her hand raised. So go ahead, Cindy.
Hi, just an FYI, I'm going to be making an official request for information from CalPERS to find out where OPEB money is going. So we have an informed, documented information on what's happening with it, because I didn't like really the answer that we received from somebody from CalPERS. So I'd like to see some documentation on it. And I'm happy to share it once I get it.
Awesome.
Thank you, Cindy. That's super awesome. You're doing that on behalf of everybody. Do you mind sharing what they did initially tell you? What was their explanation?
Yeah, I documented what they told us. It was in a separate fund. It actually is invested and makes money, and it's supposed to go towards our retirement health care, specifically for those who are actually doing the OPEB contributions.
And that was your understanding based on what the union has told us, right?
What the steward who works for CalPERS.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Awesome. Well, we appreciate, like Frank said, you putting that request for information. Hopefully we'll get it, and hopefully we can share it with everyone once it comes into you. And we'd be very interested, I guess, to see what his result of that is, because as we said, there are other people. We trust you and your explanation. We also trust other people too. And we just hear a lot of different versions. And so we do definitely want to hopefully have a future episode where we can all talk more in depth about it and kind of get to the
I
bottom
agree.
of it.
That's why documentation is important. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Cindy. And it looks like
No
we have David's hand up. So if David wants to go ahead.
Yeah, I was also told by staff that the money was specifically tied to each individual, like like kind of like a CalPERS account where you see your investment or whatever and your earnings. I heard that from a staff person, which I thought at the time I was totally wrong, because that's not how, I had never heard that before. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay. Thank you appreciate the feedback. We do have another hand with Kevin, so I guess we'll leave it up. We're sorry we're not seeing everyone's faces super big because we're sharing the other screen, but Kevin, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I looked into it a little bit. By that, I mean, I did a Google search on OPEB CERBT, which is sometimes we see it on the stuff as that.
Mm-hmm. And
this is apparently a standard vehicle for government agencies to create a fund. In this case, it's a trust fund set aside for other employee benefits, post-retirement employee benefits. This is a trust fund. This is what it says. It's a trust fund that's set aside for this. Being a trust fund, I find it unlikely that it would. I would agree with David. I think it's unlikely to be tied to an individual. It'd be a general pool of money, and its purpose is to offset expected increases of expenses or expected expenses down the line, kind of building in. It's like saving up for a rainy day kind of a thing is what it's for. Now, why this is a little bit problematic, some of the reasons David mentioned is that it's not tied to individuals. So whatever money you pay in does not mean that you will get that money out directly for you. It's employees, I think around 62 and a half, you qualify for Medicare. So post-retiree health care is not, if you retire at 62 or older, really is it that big a deal that you've paid in for? You've been forced to pay in for this. So there are some questions about it. But on the other side, healthcare is a continually rising cost. And we are in an aging society, and it's going to increase more strain on our healthcare system. So until we get some sort of single payer or some kind of government option for healthcare, this is going to be something to be dealt with. So CERBT or OPEB, which is an after public employee benefit, after retirement public employee benefit, is an existing vehicle. Before we started paying into it, these things do exist. They do, and they are for this purpose. I still don't see, and would like to see, like Cindy, documentation that says who holds the money, where is it being held, who controls that money. Because if it's a trust fund, that tells me there's a board of trustees. How do they determine how the investments go and how it's dispersed? That's documentation I have not seen yet.
So
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, and
go ahead.
Once again, this is kind of a transparency and communication issue with our union
Absolutely.
leadership agreeing to a large salary cut to create a fund, and yet they don't even know maybe, and they definitely haven't let the employees that are getting the cut and the members that are getting the cut know what this is. So
it really felt like when it came across, it really felt like being patted on the head and say, it's okay, we know what's best for you, it's going to be fine. That doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It just means, as you said, Frank, we're not really being trusted with the information.
Right. So would it be fair to say, in your opinion, Kevin, that we do have more research to do, a better understanding and more clarity to gain before we can officially say, hey, this is exactly what's what?
Well, certainly we do on this call, and certainly we do, most of the people represented by SEIU. I think for those who pass this and for those who know about it, they need to do a better deal of communication. That's really, and that's the transparency issue we're talking about. Trust us to deal with the knowledge, with the information, and tell us the whole story.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Kevin. And we have another hand, Eileen Botten, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. I have a question. What if somebody retired because of medical conditions and they're like only in their 30s? Would that money be able to be utilized for any increasing health costs that they may experience because they had to retire for medical issues?
That's a great question. I will go ahead and say for now, personally, I think we'll have Frank write that down for that future episode we're talking about, and maybe we can find an answer. But I personally am not comfortable answering that question. But if
Okay.
if Frank is, or someone else is, you're free to. What I would say is that, if early retirements generally happen, through other mechanisms. So if you're, someone might have medically retire, in which case you're collecting a different form of assistance, right? And so you're not necessarily pulling your retirement account money or anything that you put in for retirement. You're pulling in like a disability fund wage or something like that. So there are a lot of intricacies in a question like that, in terms of, is it real retirement? Is it the same and all that? But on top of that, I would say that they're, I don't quite know. Frank, did you want to answer that? If not, I see
No,
Kevin's hands
that
up.
sounds like a pretty yeah, that's a benefits question. Like, I don't think any of us are going to be able to answer that
At this time. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, understand that this fund is managed by CalPERS, as is our healthcare, as our retiree healthcare. It goes into a bucket of money to pay for everybody's healthcare. So if you retired early, it's sort of like insurance. We get, we pay into life insurance, we're paying the car insurance, and I'm a great driver. That's fine. But my car insurance helps the company pay for those people who get into accidents. And so it's this fund that should be, collectively shared, the expense and the risk with everybody, and it goes into paying for that. And it's recognizing the increase in healthcare costs. And so it's an anticipation of greater costs that they say, oh, we're going to be running out of money if we had to just maintain the healthcare level that we do now, because we're on a pay-as-you-go. Somebody gets sick, has a hospital bill, we pay that. And we need to start building up money for that. And that's kind of what this is, that CalPERS is managing for everybody. And they anticipate, what's the word? Actuarially, they anticipate more expense down the line. And it's to help stave off that fund running out of money. That's the line. That's what's been communicated to us, and it is managed by CalPERS. And the information I got through Google was from the CalPERS website.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you for that. I do want to, hopefully, I guess since we're still talking about, we can leave it up. I did want to get the screen down, but we have one more thing to talk about on this screen before we lower it. So I see Cindy's hand up. So go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, until we actually get the documentation, the request for information, we have no idea if any money is actually going out of the OPEB fund. So even to be able to answer Arlene's question, we wouldn't know how to answer it until we actually see the documentation that says whether or not any money is going out for any of this.
Right. Agreed. And I guess generally, Eileen, what I would say is, if we were just going on hunches, I would say the answer would probably be no, just because I don't think that you would create a fund like this to help those types of situations. I think kind of what Kevin alluded to, the fund would more than likely be a supplemental monetary fund for when the expenditures go too high through a different means, right? So if regular course of business creates us to run out of money, this would kind of trigger in, is my guess on it, as opposed to having like a separate kiddie pool that would allow people to retire early or whatnot. So it's not tied to the individual, I would assume, and I would guess it's more tied to the overall piggy bank, kind of like I guess a savings and a checkings, right? Like you have your savings account there, and a lot of people use their checking to do normal course of business, live life. And then if you have to reach into your savings, you do that then, as opposed to, hey, I have a savings account that's specifically for, vacationing or whatever. So I don't
Yeah,
think
and
this is
and
one of
until
those.
we know the breakdown, even if it works like that, we can't even give a real answer to that question. So I hear
Exactly.
you. I'm wanting to try to answer it, but technically we don't know how it's actually working. So yeah, the RFI will have to help with and make the difference on this.
Exactly. So another thing we wanted to bring up real quick on the last thing on the OPEB was some people were wondering why, was this a bargaining fail that we have the 3.5% decrease right away? Was this just because it had to be done? Was there pros and cons? I think or was it a good decision, a bad decision? And I think I've heard, from both sides, some people saying, hey, we should have fought and maintained that we weren't paying OPEB through, the rest of our contract, kind of to get us back for delaying raises and all that. Some people kind of thought that it was a smart idea, I guess more from a marketing perspective, that it's possible that we allowed the OPEB to kick in right now because we're getting that 4.55% GSI. And so the way that it balances out, we're overall looking at a 1.05% increase, like Frank pointed to, where instead we might be looking at a much higher increase this year, but then next year, all of a sudden that 3.5% comes out and it looks like we took a pay cut. And so, there is some rumblings that maybe it was a marketing decision to say, hey, if we just include the full 3.5% now, it'll kind of wash off and people won't feel, as impacted by it as they would if we waited, which is a very interesting decision if that were the case. The other thing I want to go a little more in depth on was this healthcare stipend, just to kind of bring it up because it wasn't exactly clear to everyone. And I might not even be clear on it, but here's my understanding is that we had a healthcare, and Yvonne kind of explained it this way on Friday. We had a healthcare stipend in our contract that goes through June 2023 of $260. But that only covered approximately 70% of the employees that we represent. And so when we signed the side letter agreement, we had an expansion. And so that's what you'll see under E subpoint A, is that there's an expansion of that stipend that happened during the side letter that brought those numbers up upwards of 90% were covered under this stipend. Well, that expansion is going to continue. And so it doesn't end right now. It's going to continue all the way until June 30th, 2022. And with that, sometime, next year, at the beginning of 2021, possibly March or April, there will be enrollment forms for that 20-ish% that's going to be falling off in June 2022 for them to get back onto Flex Select. And so there will be an open enrollment period for that. And then June 30th, 2022, those 20-ish% people will fall off. And then the rest of the 70% who are originally in the contract would continue through the length of the contract in June 2023, at which point, obviously, somewhere between now and then, we're going to have to renegotiate with the state. And so we'll see whether that's something that continues, whether it expands, and all of that. So it is possible that expansion does end June 30th, 2022, but it is possible that we somehow negotiate in the contract that says, hey, our new contract that starts, in 2023 is going to have these people anyway. So I think that could be a movable part. But as for right now, that's the status of the healthcare stipend. And so I think that covers, unless anyone has anything else on that. I think that kind of recaps the side letter negotiations and where we're at with all of that. And so next we wanted to talk about other relevant issues. So we kind of recapped the past business of the board meeting. We just kind of went over current-ish / past of the side letter agreement. And then we also wanted to talk about what's currently happening right now is that we're in the election protest period. And so currently, as most of you know by now, we had the election. The selected winner was Richard Lewis Brown. He had been contacted and congratulated. We officially, said that he's the winner, but we also have a protest period that goes up until June 10th. And so we're currently in that period. And so it's right now we still are. We don't know if anyone's going to protest. There are rumblings that, Tony Owens might protest. What we would say on this is obviously Tony Owens not on here right now, and I haven't received a copy of his protest or anything. So if anyone else could speak to it, raise your hand. But that's just a rumor. He might or might not be protesting. I don't know. But what we did want to bring this up for is not only to inform everyone that this protest period does exist, and it does go till June 10th, but if you feel that for any reason that the election should be protested, you should contact whoever candidate you voted for the position you think should be protested. So if it's the president, you would contact whoever you voted for president that wasn't Richard Lewis Brown, and you get on them right now before the 10th and demand that they protest it for you, if that's how you feel. If not, you move on and we continue, life how it is. But you do have this period, whether we like it or we don't, whether we think it's, should be part of the process or we shouldn't, it's there and you should take advantage of it. If you feel like there is some sort of wrong that needs to be righted, it's your right to kind of reach out to your representative to get that done. And remember, only people who only people who ran for the position you think should be protested can protest. So that could be a DLC president. I know a lot of people want to focus on the presidency because that is the most important position. But if you think that, your DLC president, something corrupt happened and they were doing something that they shouldn't have and shouldn't have won, you're welcome to protest whoever ran against, have whoever ran against them protest or any other position. So that does exist through the 10th. And so do whatever you want with that information, and we'll obviously update you whenever we know whether a protest was filed and kind of what goes down with that. What we will say is that most protests are going to go to Yvonne as the president. And so really the policy file says the president and just happens to be Yvonne. And there are situations where someone was protesting, I guess, Yvonne winning, it would go to the vice president, secretary, treasurer. It's not quite clear if, that counts because the presidency position at all is being protested, or if it has to be the fact that she won. So maybe, Kevin would speak to that in a bit, but I, in my personal opinion, I would think my interpretation of the policy file would read, if anyone protests the president position at all, it should go to Kevin because it would be a protest of the president, right? Of the president position. But we'll see what happens with that. And I see Cindy's hands up. So go ahead, Cindy.
Hi. So I spoke directly to Tony Owens on what he was going to protest. And he is planning on protesting the timelines. The timelines and the documentation that was stated for the actual election that talked about people signing up to be a member in order to get a ballot, how the timelines changed at one point so that they had to become a member by a certain time, which actually violates policy file. If they actually signed up to become a member prior to the ballots being sent out, they're allowed to actually vote, which they cut people off on April 7th. So he's doing all the timeline stuff. He's not objecting to any candidates or anything like that. He's talking about the election procedure itself.
So what's the intended outcome then? Did you gather
Good
that?
question. He did not say whether or not he was asking for a revote. He did not say he was asking for anything like that. He did say he has documented many people who became a member and did not get a ballot to vote, even when they called in to get a ballot sent to them. So that's the objection.
So so possibly he wants votes added or possibly a revote, but it's not clear exactly what.
Not clear exactly, correct.
Okay.
And I'm looking at the policy file here, and the remedy is not required to be part of the protest. It's not listed as one of the things that the protest would include.
Right, and it doesn't have to, but for clarity for us right now, it'd be interesting to know what the point is. What are you trying?
Right.
What are you trying to accomplish?
Well,
Correct. And that's the
that would be like a
question.
redo. And also, there's nothing here that indicates that even a protest of the president would go to the VP Secretary on election protests. I know many things. HR 1s against the president would go to the Secretaries, but not in the way the election protests. The policy file has a lot of gaps, a lot of open holes that need to be tightened up. That being said, while we're on the subject of protests, I actually have an information request out now, which if it proves to be valid, I may be filing a protest myself. And Robert, I want to extend the invitation here. You don't have to answer here if you want to join in it. The issue is there's a couple of candidates for VP bargaining that did not have 2 years of stewardship prior to the nomination period. If so, they should have been disqualified and not on the list. And if they were not on that candidate list, where would those votes have gone?
Right. No, I'd be very interested in that. Because I do.
If I
How do
get
you
that
get on the
documentation,
ballot?
I'll invite you to join me. Go ahead, Frank. What?
How did they get on the ballot if they didn't meet the qualifications?
To keep Robert and I off.
Yeah.
That's my paranoid answer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I understand. Yeah, I understand that. Like, who approved? Does the president approve who gets on the ballot? Like, is there election committee do it?
Yes, election committee, I believe.
Yeah, we know who runs that. Okay.
Yeah, I believe it would be too. I'd be happy to join you in that protest because that is I think a legitimate one with merit.
Yeah.
Several
and it
people,
can go either
not to
way.
be a conspiracy theorist, like you were
Right.
saying, several people did tell me that they believe that extra candidates were thrown on to kind of, stimmy the vote for me. But like, it's hard for me to say that because I don't want to say, have anyone misconstrue to say that I should have won or anything like that.
Right.
If not, but I do think that you and I and anyone else who legitimately brand deserves a fair process.
And that's really what it's about. It's not about changing the results. It's about making sure the members' voices, everyone's treated fairly and the members' voices are properly heard. And it could go either way because these people got, I have it in front of me, how much did they get? Like 300 votes, 327 or 302 votes. Not a whole lot of votes, but enough which if I had received those votes, I would have won. But there's no way of knowing if those votes would have gone to me or to Robert or to Irene. We don't know where they would have gone. So a redo would be necessary. But the protest committee could also say, we take those people, disqualify them, take them off the ballot, and didn't change the results. It could go either way. But the point is to get it out there that this was not handled properly.
No, I appreciate you bringing that up. That is very important to know that it wasn't handled properly. And I think we all absolutely, should be demanding, even if it doesn't affect us or, I know like David won his position, doesn't affect him, but hopefully we'd also get his support in this as well. And Annika, because at the end of the day, I think we want fair elections, regardless of who wins, even if we had a revote and, Irene took 2,000 more votes next time. She just died, like, cool, that's fine. I have no problem. We just, I think that for the integrity of our union going forward, it's more important that we get it right than any particular, I don't necessarily, say that I have to win or you have to win. I just think it's important that we get it right.
And let's face it, we probably all heard about people who did not even trust the election, how it was going to be run or turned out. That lack of trust in the process, I think, suppresses votes and voters and member engagement. And that's what we need to turn around. Yeah,
and we definitely have work to do on that. Not to throw Frank's business out there, but I guess I'm just going to. Frank had his every piece of election mail has come to his house since he's lived there in his house for the last 7 years, 6.5 years. For some reason, his ballot got mailed to his parents' house. And so however that happened, but there are things like that just don't really make sense to a lot of us.
Yeah. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, Frank, but are you a junior?
No, I'm not a junior.
Are your
No,
parents
not
state
at all.
workers?
They're not state workers. No, they're not involved
So
in
there is
the
no
union.
plausible reason why it should have gone to their address.
No, I never changed my address with the union. Every piece of mail and every prior election, everything was sent to my Sacramento house. And somehow I was waiting and waiting to look in the mail every day. I contacted my mother and somehow it ended up at my parents' house. Never received union mail there.
Tony would probably want that information to add to his protest.
Yeah. I mean,
Anyways,
yeah,
you're
I
right.
heard a lot of these same type of issues, but something was going on. I don't think I was individually targeted. Could have been, but
Yeah,
if that happened to
Could
me,
have been.
then it probably was happening to
I think
lots
there's
of
a lot of bad data too, right? I think that, we don't quite have our IT affairs in order. And so it is possible, I know that the union website, you can't access a lot of parts of the union website from Department of Healthcare Services right now. And you haven't been able to for months, and I've been fighting it, but they blame our IT and say our IT doesn't know how to properly update certificates and, this, that, and the other. So it is possible that there's some sort of like, we have some super old erroneous data that we gave to this third party election committee, who then just used that data that they got. And that's what the results were. So, not to spin too far into conspiracies and say, hey, it's deliberate. It could just be the fact that, we just don't have adequate systems for all of these things to have accurate data, right? And we'd
That's completely
rely
plausible,
on.
but my fevered paranoid dream conspiracy theory was the way, because the election is handled by a third party, the way to throw the election your way is to make sure you give them bad addresses for people you don't think are going to support you. Frank, you're on record, supporting Robert. Maybe they didn't want to go that way. Annika, you and I know that last election, we made some calls to people and they were all complaining they didn't get their ballots in time. If they were our supporters, they were not receiving ballots. It seemed to go that way. This is not enough evidence to say anything definitive, and there are plausible explanations for screwing it up. I mean, for having bad data. Although, Frank, yours is the most egregious case I've ever heard. Having that history established, and then on this time it goes somewhere different.
Yeah, in the past where I had publicly been in support of Yvonne Walker, I got all those ballots at the address that I've always been on file with the union.
So what's the variable here?
You saw Annika's hand up. Annika, go ahead.
I actually was just going to say that, for me, that's what's highlighted out of it, is that really what your guys' race tells me is that these individuals were not vetted. And, that makes me question even, I know I'm a member in good standing, but was everybody else on that list a member in good standing? Not just having been a steward for 2 years, right? So if they're not even vetting the people who should have been on the ballot, like then comes all these other issues that are much more believable when something that simple is already off. And so, yeah, I think we've talked about all the things that you guys bring up, right, are all, I think, very, lots of us are thinking it, right, statewide, like we call them, you call them conspiracy theories, but the way that we've seen things happen in the past makes it a little bit more than just a conspiracy theory sometimes, given, even some of the facts that we've been able to gather sometimes, whether those are thrown out, accepted, whatever, right? So I do think your guys' race especially has the most evidence. I actually haven't seen what Tony has, but I would imagine that those two issues would have the most evidence, because based off of phone calls that we were making, lots of people didn't get ballots. The fact that those timelines were moved without us knowing is problematic. And we asked that question when we were there watching the ballots being counted, who made that decision and when? And Paul Koch actually said that decision was made before the stuff was printed. So why weren't we notified of that date prior to, right? Stuff like that to me is intentional. And problematic. And I agree, many changes need to happen in the future when it comes to elections, because you are absolutely correct. It doesn't matter who wins. We need to make sure that people are voting and that they're out there, engaged in the process. And then whoever wins, well, then we hope that they do a good job, and they should be given all the resources that they need to try and do that job as best as they can. So
since we're having a discussion, I appreciate you bringing that to us. Since we're having a discussion, I guess it would be an opportune time to bring up, well, maybe this is the future of our elections, right? I know that, we have a president-elect who is saying that, anyone should be a steward, anyone can run for any position, anyone can vote. So, it's interesting for us to be having hey, you didn't meet these requirements, because those were the requirements, 2 years in good standing. But it is interesting to see, like, is our union is our next election going to have those same standards, or are we trying to transform our union to maybe have different standards in the future, where maybe all those people would have legitimately been on the ballot?
Well, it's interesting to note the history of that 2-year requirement. It wasn't always the case when it was first formed. To go back a little bit back in time, I don't know if you know who Mish Bloch-Scherls is, but she became a new Deber when I was a Deber too, and we went to one of our first SBACs. We're talking about 2013, maybe early before that.
The only thing I know about her is that she's the first person that Richard promised he'd make a steward on day one.
Oh, well, that's valuable. She anyway, I helped her craft her speech because she wanted to run for bunk office, I think vice chair, under Sophia at that time. I think Sophia was expected to win, and so she's Unit 4. She wanted to run for vice chair, and I helped her craft her speech that morning of the SBAC, which she's going to present later before the elections, and she ended up winning. She ended up beating the person who thought was a shoo-in, Tamika Robinson. So when Tamika then wanted to run for VP of Organizing Representation, turns out Mish wanted to run for that too. But Mish worked in personnel as a confidential employee for much of her career and was only a steward for about 1 year and 10 months, 1 year, 9 months prior to the nomination period. So now we have this new requirement. You have to be a steward for 2 years prior to running for the nomination period, and that blocked her from being able to run. The person who already beat Tamika once, this made it easier for Tamika to win that time.
Wow. Thanks for filling us in on that. That makes complete sense. That it would go
down.
And
I remember hearing that story. I'm like, I guess all I'm saying is follow the rules, whatever those rules are, whatever we've decided the rules are, they need to be followed. Right. We need to be accountable to people. They should know when these dates are happening. Like, none of that should be secret to anybody.
Absolutely.
And I would we all need to be on guard. They've had a lot of what I would call restrictions on who can run, and voter restrictions that have gone through. That was one of them. And a lot of times the argument has been, and I hear this not only from Yvonne, but from the people who support Yvonne, like Manny and others that support Yvonne, is that, well, we got to have qualified people in there. We got to make sure only qualified people can run. And my argument has been and is, it's not up to the officers in office to decide who is qualified to run and take office. It is up to the voters to decide who they want there. And if they want somebody who's completely incompetent, has no experience, has only been a steward for 4 days, and that's who wins, well, that says something about who's running and who we have here. So we got to, as Yvonne says, trust the members, trust the voters to pick who's qualified. And so whenever we see somebody wants to put restrictions on who can run for a union office, remember that they are denying the members that opportunity to make that choice with their vote.
Well, they got to be at least represented to run, hopefully.
Yes, they have to be. They have to be a member of the union, and I don't think it's a bad idea to have them be a steward to have to run for office as well. But the requirements to get to steward, and this is a whole lapse discussion, needs to be grease that path a little bit better too, so people can become stewards. I'm not quite to Brown's level where everybody becomes a steward, but we do need to make it easier to become a steward.
Yeah, and I would agree, closing out some of that discussion, that we need to be more clear on the timelines, the things like the cutoff date of April 7th should have been more clearly stated. I was surprised that anyone was surprised by that, though. I did. In fact, Tony, you can actually pull up a video of me and Tony on camera together during one of his calls, his Zoom meetings, where I actually told him, hey, you realize that the cutoff date is going to be probably closer to the end of March. I was like, I wouldn't bet on anyone becoming a member after March 31st getting in. And he disagreed. And, you know, there was a falling out after that where he thought that I was being rude on his video with this information. And I was just like, I'm just telling you my experience. And my experience is that the cutoff window is not going to be May 20th. Like, it's not going to be, you know, April, whatever, when, you know, the last, or May 7th or whatever, when the last day, it's going to be sometime at the end of March. And obviously I was off by a week. It didn't happen until April 7th, but that is something that, you know, should have been publicized, should have been made clear, should have been public, but also something that was very clearly expressed by me and others to say, hey, we know how this stuff works. We know that it's not going to go like, if you want people to sign up to vote for you, they're going to need to do it soon.
Well, there's a
Well,
pragmatic
and
reason
that's a
for it.
bigger point on a larger scale anyway, right? You never really want to push it to the very end and hope that it's those, like, you want to do your work and the organizing in the forefront. That way you're not expecting or like waiting for those last votes anyway, right? So I think kind of your suggestions were probably also a better strategic move, right? So
yeah, it's and some people thought it was a better strategic move to wait, because if you foreshadowed that you were becoming a member, that you were going to vote for whatever candidate or whatnot. And so it is really, I guess, sad that we even you know, have that many conspiracy theories going around, you know, I guess. Yeah. So, and so, yeah, we wanted to move on with that. So the election protest period is there. So just a reminder, if you had a protest, it sounds like Kevin and I will be talking offline soon, but if you have a protest other than that, or if you're just a person and you think that, you know, Sophia should be protesting, contact her. If you think, you know, whoever should be protesting, contact those people. That's kind of your right and obligation to, you know, let them know what you think. We had a couple of things that we want to touch on briefly, but we're probably going to go more in depth on a future episode. Just because all the details aren't here. One of which we previewed at the beginning of the episode was that we wanted to talk about telework a little bit. And so there's not a ton to talk about because we don't have the policy. There's not a statewide policy that we have yet. But what we do know is that there are departments who are sending out policy right now. And so there are departments who are telling their employees that they got to come back to work X amount of days. There are departments who are sending out surveys to kind of get a pulse for what their employees want to do. There are departments who've already given cutoff dates. I think Department of Healthcare Services ends August 31st is where telework kind of officially ends, and we got to be doing something else by then. And so we know that that's coming up. Like I said, there isn't a way for us to tell you what's going on or what the situation is at every department because we just simply don't know yet. But why we wanted to bring it up was not only to get it on people's radar. Hey, we're going to act like things are going to be changing pretty soon. If you don't already know, you're going to know soon. But also, this is the prime opportunity for us to be asserting our rights. They're implementing new policy. They should be meeting and conferring with your union on that. And so you need to make sure that you're screaming to, you know, as a steward, to the URC, to, you know, Yvonne, to our organizing and rep person, VP Annika. She should, and so we're going to open the floor up to her if she wants to talk in a second. But hopefully that should be the number one issue, or one of the top, you know, a couple issues on our radar, especially because these policies are starting to roll out. We only have so long that we can actually say, hey, stop this, you know, cease and desist until we get a say. We know JLMCs can be a part of this. So if you have a joint labor management committee, make sure that they're talking about this. But at the end of the day, I think that what we see, you know, from my perspective is that thousands of employees were begging for telework for years and always told, hey, this can't happen. We don't have the capabilities. Technologically, this doesn't work. We don't got equipment. I've heard every excuse imaginable. Honestly, kind of probably sounded like me as a teenager when my mom would tell me to do stuff. Like, I'll find any excuse we can give you You ain't going on telework. And then all of a sudden, snap your fingers, clap your hands, everyone's on telework. And so that's fine, right? Like we have issues we've talked about with that. But then I think the real problem is they want to snap their fingers again and then dictate to us how often, how we can do it. Oh, you got to come in 3 days because it's just not going to work out if you're not in the office 3 days. Well, empirically denied, right? Like we just proved to you the last year that you don't need to. And so we have to assert that right, as union members to say, hey, no, you're not going to come out here and unilaterally dictate terms of, telework to us when the cat's out of the bag, we now know what can and can't be done with telework, and we want a seat at the table. And so we just encourage everyone to assert their rights. I think that's the period we're in right now, more than anything, more than breaking down particular policies anywhere, is like, hey, right now is the period. Start screaming, start writing the URC, start hitting the stewards calls up, text Yvonne if you got her number, contact, Annika and say, hey, what are you doing now? What are you doing next week? How can I help? More so than, we don't really encourage, hey, what are you doing for me, Annika? More like, hey, how can we help? What can we do? Put people to work, but I think at the end of the day, that's a huge issue for us. It's a huge issue that you see nationwide. I think that Facebook was just I believe if I got it right, was just trying to tell everyone they had to come back, and their non-union employees are saying, oh, it's Apple. Apple is trying to get everyone back into the office, and their non-union employees are giving them the bird, saying, nah, that's no, thank you. Why would we need to come back in for 3 days when we just spent a year working 5 days out of the office? And so I think more so, like, we do have how much time to be debated on, but also what does that do for our families, right? A lot of people have much better quality of life now because they get to work from home a couple days from week. And I know that there are the opponents of that who will say, oh, it's because you're not working, you're late. Like, no, like even for me included, right? I can spend my 15-minute breaks doing some physical therapy, rehab my shoulder, whereas like I don't have the equipment at work to do that. I don't have the setup to do that. I can't really, necessarily be sweaty like that, in front of a bunch of people. And so it's not necessarily that people are abusing telework. I think it's really what we're seeing is that people are now being able to fit in those little pieces of life, throwing things in the washer and dryer that really just make an immense difference on our quality of life. And because of that, that's something that we have, an obligation to fight for. And so I don't know if anyone's hands up, but if anyone wants to chime in on that, sorry, I just kind of
Yeah, I'm gonna add
went
a
a little
little bit.
long.
Yeah, I'm gonna add a little bit there. So far from my knowledge, I can at least speak on the department that Robert and I work for, healthcare services. To my knowledge, the union is not involved in the process, in the telework process at all. And specifically the part of the org chart that I work in, program operations, we've been told who's included in the work groups to figure out and plan our telework policy. And it's only management. It's only management from every level. So the union isn't being consulted on it. And furthermore, something that was kind of left out of the telework discussion, a big part of that is, what is our seating arrangements going to look like? What are our cubicles going to look like? Because I was told on Friday that if you choose if we do have the option to choose up to 3 days telework, if you choose anything more than 1 day telework a week, you no longer have your own desk, that you will be sharing a desk. So then it's like, how is this not involving the union when it's going to affect our workplace and our desks and our materials at work? So
Work conditions.
yeah.
So this is our call right now to everyone who's watching this. Be vocal about this, assert our rights. We got money on the table we should be getting from this. Allowance is something. I'm still putting wear and tear on a personal computer that can be confiscated at any time. Any sort of, something could happen with a data breach with healthcare, and all of a sudden they're coming and confiscating my personal computer from me under a subpoena. And, now I'm out because what? Because our union hasn't ensured that you're giving everyone laptops and, anything like that. So there's a lot of work to be done. We see Annika's hands up first. So if you want to go ahead, Annika.
Hey, yeah, thanks. I definitely think that it's something that we as state employees, not just stewards, really, this is like a primo kind of issue that we can all get behind, right? Whatever feelings you have kind of about union, us coming together under what we should kind of demand in some of these circumstances as employees. I think we absolutely need to be vocal about. I know, kind of like in your division, in our division, they're not really involving the union with a lot of the decisions that we're making. Now, because I am who I am, right, I get on the calls when they're soliciting kind of, information from the employees. And when nobody speaks up, I take the opportunity to speak from that union perspective of, you really need to be talking to us, the employees, because really managers, the ones who they have making the decisions on these telework things, aren't the ones doing the work, right? So yes, you have some work out there where the quality of life, I would say, is better with telework anyway. But you do have different types of jobs. Like I could imagine EDD is very much like ours, where you're still very much tied to your desk. So there's different issues behind the telework, not just being able, or like you had mentioned, having everything you need necessary to do your job, but then also comes into like the ergonomics, right? So for me, ergonomics has been a problem. I've done several workers' comp claims in the past, but now I have half of my equipment at work and half my equipment at home because they're making us come in a couple days a week, right? So the best thing we could do right now, and the only reason I say right now is because unfortunately, I don't think our union is responding the way organizationally, the way we should be responding to these things. During COVID, I was trying to go out doing health and safety walkthroughs, making sure that the employees who were having to report to the offices had everything that they needed in order to do their job in a safe manner. The staff who was coming out with me occasionally was shut down, right, from the top at the local. And so then it became more of, is the steward willing to, the chief steward are they able to continue doing it? And was I being invited in? That's how we continued, where we were able to continue. So even that moving forward, right? You talk about these hoteling stations that a lot of departments are talking about doing right now, where if you're only coming in a certain amount of time, you are sharing the space. Well, then you're still talking about health and safety issues, right? Like, is that space being cleaned after and before? Who are they expecting to do it? DMV had lots of issues with that in the last 4 to 6 months, where they were kind of already doing some hoteling. And it's like the managers aren't thinking about all the ins and outs of what that employee does, what they touch, what they don't touch, who comes in and out even of the office, right? Managers sometimes have no clue that you've been in the office 3 times. So things I think our union should absolutely be involved in. Please stay in contact. Anybody who's watching, feel free to reach out to me. I do what I can right now. I see with, in hopes that our president-elect, Mr. Brown, does what he says he's going to do and gives me the access that I need to really help doing something like helping those in need, right? We've talked about starting like a health and safety committee, getting that running. Why wasn't that running through COVID? And why isn't that running even now, so that we could make sure that our employees are going back to a safe situation? So, I mean, we're going to have issues with vaccine, right? Like what's going to be, are there going to be guidelines around, are you vaxxed? Are you not vaxxed? Can you come in? I mean, I don't see that that's something they could make us do, but that's going to cause concerns for individuals coming in. So anyway, lots of stuff to think about. I think that we definitely need to be involved in the conversation, and we definitely need to utilize our voices. You don't need to be a steward to talk about what you need as a worker. You just need to be able to vocalize it and make sure that, you're not just leaving it up to the managers who don't do the work normally.
Thank you for you brought up a lot of important issues on that. I think one to add to that we really need is some sort of open enrollment period, right? Because in the example that Frank gave, it Department of Healthcare Services, if all this is ending August 31st, but you're still concerned with your personal health issues to where you're like, man, I don't think I can go back into the office because I'm scared of the whole COVID thing and I still have my concerns. But then say, come December, we don't really have too many cases in the US, or there's some sort of cure, we're in a better spot, whatever. Well, now what if this person's like, my back's hurting from being at home all the time. I'm finally over like my fears of the whole COVID thing. I'm ready to get back to work. Well, are they going to be allowed to come back and have the 5 days on there? Or is there is there an automatic right to switch at any time, your status? Is there an open enrollment period? Is it going to be dictated by, management? What position does what? I think those are all super important things that we have to talk about, when it comes to those things. And then you brought up the other issues, which is ergonomics. How can I hotel if I have a specific keyboard at a specific height of my monitors and a specific chair, and then you're going to come in and mess all of that up? Or I'm going to mess it up for you? That doesn't make sense. And then I think if you want to add in something in addition to that, that's always concerned me less with this hoteling thing, then I don't know if you guys know, but like the cubicle heights are coming down at a lot of departments. And so for me, the things I think about from a worker's perspective is like, okay, well, what if I'm in my cubicle and I have a medication I need to take 3 times a day? And so then all of a sudden I go to take my pill, with lunch or whatever before lunch. And now everyone's seeing me take medication, right? Say part of my ergonomic equipment that you're talking about is due to my medical condition. Well, now you're in my cubicle looking at my ergonomics. So now you have a clue into my medical situation, right? And so you have keys to all the locked cat. I mean, there's so many issues to talk about. And I think a lot of them, that I concern myself with is like, let's maintain the individual privacy of each employee. And that's very hard to do when you have other people who are sharing that space. So before I talk too much more, we have Eileen Botten again. Go ahead, Eileen.
Okay, hi. I just want to also say that I've been teleworking for probably about 6 years. EDD can telework. And EDD as a whole has their instructions for all teleworkers. Within their policy and procedure on page 8, it says that each department should write their own what they need to do from each person. And I was the one who wrote that for us, for my department. I also want to say that even when there was a lot of bullying and everything going around with our supervisors, I got one of my people to full-time telework before COVID because of all the bullying and stuff. So I just want to say that. And what else did I want to say? I forget. But anyway,
sorry.
if you wanted the policy and procedure from EDD and the one that I wrote for, because it states each department shall write their own. And that's what I did. EDD has a university. I went to EDD University, took the analyst class, wrote the policy and procedure, and it was approved. Now take it, when COVID came, then they did an emergency one, which was sort of basically the same. We're doing the same things that I wrote, but I could give you the policy and procedures from EDD as a department, as a whole division or whatever it is, as an agency, and I could give you the one that I wrote for my specific department.
Awesome. Yeah. Are you offering that to everyone or Donica or?
To whoever wants it.
Yeah, if you could email it in to talkshop1000@gmail.com. Frank will throw that in the chat for you right now. And we would take it just to help inform our future episode. And I don't want to speak for anyone else on the call, but
okay,
feel free to speak up right now or type that you wanted as well. But we do appreciate that. And yeah, you're right. There are, the Department of Healthcare Services one is very general. It just says that each division will have their own. And so I personally been teleworking for 2 days a week for a couple of years now as well, just because our division allows it. But next we'll go to Mary. Mary's iPhone. It's Mary De La Cruz.
Yes. Hi. How you
Hey,
doing?
sister, how you doing?
Real good. I'd like to just put in also, and this might be an educational component because I work with CDPH. We're HFENs. We're nurses. We've been going out, and so we're teleworking. I'm going to use that term that they throw out there, but you know what the definition in that department means, teleworking? That means that I do my write-up at home, but I'm going, instead of from the office out in the field, I'm going from my home out into the field. I'm not at home, but they call that teleworking because I don't go into the office. And so I think that's when we're negotiating for teleworkers. I know there's some that work strictly from home, but we still go out in the field. We just get to go from our home out into the field, not from the office. So, and now what our department is trying to do is get HFENs to, which is crazy. Instead of going from your home to your assigned facility that you need to go investigate or inspect, they want us to come into the office first and then go out. For what? For nothing. So they can see your face, so they can, which adds more driving. And
Right.
so, but they call that teleworking, not necessarily working from home, my shift, but leaving from home. And then when I'm done investigating, I can write from home and turn it in, but I still have to be out in the field. And they call that for us teleworking.
Thanks for sharing, Mary. I would add a little insight on that. I think an interesting thing is if a department or an employer rather requires you to report straight to a travel facility from your home, you're allowed to count all the miles from your house to whatever facility it is you're investigating. But if they require you to go to work first, you only get to count the miles from the workplace to the place that you're visiting. And so that very well could substantially change mileage calculations for reimbursement for anyone. In which case I'd highly recommend those people insist on the fact that, they need and it's hard, right? But you try to do rental cars if you can and stuff like that so that the mileage gets,
logged in
up on their dime as opposed to yours. But
Mhm.
yeah, that is could be a reason why they're trying to have the switch, is it's easier for them to budget for everyone leaving from the same location than trying to figure out who's staying where. And you could switch your address and say you're driving from San Diego to LA every day just to get to your site. And so I'm sure that they're trying to save money somehow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Kevin.
That's the point I was going to bring up as well. But also what I want to go back to the telework issue is this is an opportunity to organize one of our lowest membership bargaining units, that being Unit 1. There's a low membership, and this is a big issue primarily with the Unit 1, which is our largest bargaining unit. So this could be a great organizing opportunity for us because there are a lot of concerns, especially when you look at the electronic monitoring portion of our contract and how management's going to be feeling very paranoid about having workers out in the field doing who knows what when they're in teleworking. So that's going to become a debatable issue. What the policy is and the hoteling that's already been discussed here, and that those issues will be forefront. And I think it's going to be of great concern to Unit 1. And this is a great tool to get them involved. So you should be part of the union, get part of this discussion. We have these town halls or YouTube meetings on that very issue. Conversely, an increased number of teleworking will ultimately have a negative impact on our bargaining unit 15 and perhaps even our bargaining unit 4 brothers and sisters, because the use of our buildings will decrease. There will be less need for our custodians' work because we won't have as much square footage being used. And so we may be looking at layoffs or a decrease in work for them. Our OTs, OAs, and PTs.
I don't want to cut you off or interrupt, but I was saving this till the end. But what I was going to say is, when you mentioned bargaining unit 1, I was going to say, well, also could be a good for bargaining unit 15, because although I do hear your points on possible decreased building space, if we're hoteling, you're going to be increasing the frequency in which things need to be cleaned, which could be a reason why we need to increase the number of unit 15.
Getting to exactly why we need to get them involved as well. I don't want to just think of it as a Unit 1 issue, because it impacts them as well. And it could be a benefit, as you're saying. And let's face it, they organize a lot better than Unit 1 people do. So let's get their help and their support as well, and you know, force as well. And as far as I think we also need to be looking at, I think we'll be seeing an increase in reasonable accommodation being filed with departments. That could also be a tool to push them towards meeting with us and coming to some more equitable teleworking issues, because as Annika brought up about ergonomic equipment being provided for both the home and hoteling situation, and need to have every hoteled cubicle to be ergonomic for everybody and adjustable for that. So that's going to be an issue as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot on this, and I think it could be used to really increase. It's a great tool for increasing our membership and recognizing, finally getting this union into the 21st century. We've so focused on 20th century kind of organizing tools. This is a 21st century issue that I think we can really use to increase our membership and involvement.
Yeah, thank you for that. And hopefully we can use it to kind of bring people together. Something I always try to do at my work site is occasionally leave little notes for the custodian staff, you know, to thank them. Because I think that we do have a problem internally with our union where a lot of non-Unit 15 people look down on the custodians, and really it's a lot of negative, place blame. They didn't do this, they didn't clean that. Why isn't this done? Why? And not really having an understanding of what these people do on a daily basis, what their roles are, how much area they need to cover. So I constantly try to bring awareness to say, hey, like, we're in partnership with Unit 15 and we need them, you know, and that they should be respected, no different than an analyst. But hopefully this kind of bargaining or this kind of issue will bring us closer together, where more people will realize that, hey, you shouldn't just leave angry notes that like your cubicle wasn't cleaned. Like, every single time I've ever left a note that says, hey, I appreciate what you do, if you could please, if you have the time, vacuum my cubicle, it gets vacuumed every single time, you know. But it's, I think the kindness is something we're missing a lot when it comes to Unit 15. And then the other thing I wanted to throw out based on what you said, and this isn't, you know, I don't mean to offend anyone, this isn't a direct call out at Annika, but I would like to see Annika have, in her role, have a committee, a telework task force on July 1st with some people like yourself, Kevin, or whoever else. So I think that committee could be put together now. You know, we could get the union leave stuff approved, and if Richard's really about it, you know, you present to him on the 1st, hey, here's I need these 8 people out for this amount of time for this important task force, and really hit it. And then, you know, we're going to know on day 1 whether he, you know, gives you the blessing and we get rolling or we're not. But I'd really like to see a telework task force from our union ASAP, yesterday, tomorrow, today, next week. But as soon as possible. So if we have any news on that in the future, we'll bring it to you. If there's any sort of signups or applications for that or anything, we'll try to make you aware of that. But I would definitely something I would love to see from our union.
Yeah, the union definitely needs to be involved and to push themselves into the conversation of what the telework policy is going to be statewide, as well as department specifically. Because like Kevin said, this could be something good to drive membership. It won't be to drive it while the conversation's happening. That's not going to happen. It will be a good driver for membership after we get the win of good telework policies. Because like a sports team needs some wins before they get fans. The union needs wins before they get members. We can't keep asking members to pay dues or become a member to pay dues to help in the fight. The union needs to insert themselves and push themselves into the conversation, get the win, and then use that as a driver to increase membership. So hopefully we have our leaders and our stewards on this call push and insert themselves into the conversation so we can build the union and get a solid win.
Yeah,
definitely something I'm already actually not that specifically, but already trying to get Richard thinking about, right? I just from watching his videos and having some conversations with him, you know, there's many things that need to be thought about, and I think right now my job is to kind of like, hey dude, like there's these things that we kind of you gotta ask about, like, or we gotta move around you not talking to Yvonne right now. Either you're gonna call her nonstop 24/7 to get some of these answers, or we're gonna start moving and planning so that once you are sworn in, we can move, right? Those conversations, he said we're going to have another meeting, and that's promising. But there are, like you've mentioned, there are many things right now. There are people on union leave that we need to think about. Are we going to continue that union leave? Is that program even going to continue running the way it's running? I'm not sure if things like JLMCs that are currently running that have people, or tables, different tables that are open because they're discussing different units and different things in different departments. All of these things are moving right now. So are we going to continue moving them? Are we going to have different people in those roles? All very important conversations that I think this team, if moving forward, if working together, need to be conversations that we're having now, right? Because the first is going to come quick. And like you said, not only do people have expectations based off of what's been put out there, but there's very real things that need to happen so that we can actually like continue moving. And I mean, you mentioned a big one, our IT department, right? Like we pay way too much money and have way too many staffers there for our IT to not be on point. What is the problem? Let's fix that. That's like an immediate win in my book, right? For membership.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things, thank you for that. And I would say, as the vice president of organizing, no one should know better how to organize than you. And by saying that, I mean, don't wait on Richard for anything would be my suggestion. Just start acting. He's already given you the blessing. Just start acting and moving and make him tell you no.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just a different world. So we appreciate that. Next, we wanted to, like I said, that we'll talk more about telework in the future as more things come up. Hopefully we can schedule, as Annika knows more, as we get a task force, as more policies start to roll in, we'll have another more robust discussion on the issue on here. But we just wanted to touch on that now, just to tell everyone, hey, get loud and get proud. Start telling everyone that we deserve a seat at the table for these telework policies. And then we also wanted to touch on, we did have someone ask us a question about the Stewards and Laps program. They said that they can't wait to become a steward again because Richard's granting stewardship back to people who had previously lost it. They can't wait to be members again, things like that. And so there is some kind of confusion. How is this going to work? Is Richard just going to wave the wand and create stewards? Anyone who asks him, is it going to have to go through laps? Is he really just waving his wand to approve you for laps? What does that look like? What does the new laps program look like? Given that he says he wants, the old laps program that Yvonne had thrown away and kind of something new started. What does it look like to certify stewards in the future? Is it a 6-month program still? Is it online only? Are we gonna, have cohorts again? Or is there going to be priority given to people who've been applying for years and haven't gotten in? Is there any sort of, I guess, what you call like seniority based on application date that needs to apply? So we have gotten a lot of questions about that. Again, we're bringing this up towards the end because these aren't things that we can necessarily answer right now. Annika's on the call. If you wanted to speak to that, you could, but no pressure. If you don't worry about it. But we do know that people are asking, and that's where we're at right now, is that we don't know. But yeah, Annika, looks like you put your camera on, so please.
Yeah, I was actually just going to jump off, but I heard laps and I thought, well, maybe not. Really, it's, for me, yes, laps needs to get going, right? Do I think that there needs to be some major overhaul of it? Yes, but somehow we're going, like, I'm not sure I fully am on board, and maybe it'll take some more conversations with making everybody a steward. I do kind of feel like that would lessen the power of the steward at the work site. However, have there been instances, and I would say that there's been many in my 3 years of the chairing the Chief Stewards Committee, of individuals who I would have considered worthy to become a steward who were passed passed up, as well as stewards who lost their stewardship for kind of, in my opinion, some ridiculous reasons. Being on medical leave and kind of not having been blessed by the appropriate people. And so then it just kind of goes away, right? There are certain individuals that I think probably should get their stewardship back immediately because they were kind of taken off, like I said, unjustly. So I think there are many changes to be made. I'm already actually, the whole online stuff that you mentioned, like you said, there are obviously some things, some connections, some communications that I'm having with individuals because I see them being key players in this, right? People I've worked with before, people who I know are very knowledgeable in, like, say, building the Leadership Academy, all virtual, right? So that's an in-house. This is just a very small example. We used to pay some $20,000, $30,000 a year for this program that we didn't utilize and didn't work for most of our stewards, right? They would have to sign in. There were there were very specific kind of entities that you had to get right to even get on the Leadership Academy before. And so we realized, like, very early on when I first started 3 years ago, that this was something that we could save the local money on, how do in-house, and even have a better quality trainings, right? And so that's kind of actually, if you remember when we started doing more webinars for AST, all of that was kind of stuff that I was like, hey, why aren't we already reaching out to more rural areas by having this be virtual, right? And then came COVID and we started using it all the time. So there are these things that they kind of let me have nuggets of that we weren't able to fully expand. So those are, I think, are things that we could jump on immediately. Those plans are, right, those pops that they like to say have already been done, right? Those can be moved. I feel like the changes that need to be made are going to be, they're going to need to be made incrementally, and with, like you said, right, we got to get individuals in there who understand how adults think and learn, so that we could kind of have our trainings be more effective, more interactive, and so that stewards walk away from, not just stewards, I would like to see trainings for members as well, right? So that people who take these trainings walk away from them actually feeling like they got something, and not like, oh, that was weird. Meg Whitman was in one of the ASTs still, right? Like, were we supposed to change all that? What happened? So even the revamps that I've suggested, I haven't been given the authority to fully, like, really revamp them. But hopefully some changes y'all have seen, even a tiny bit. That's just like a snippet, right? So I'm very excited for changing all that, but I do think some of these bigger ideas will need deeper conversation. Obviously, he's the president. He's going to be able to do some things that he just wants to do. We saw Yvonne do it. So hopefully, I'm hoping that he just doesn't abuse that, right? Let's at least have a conversation, and let's see if we could come to some kind of a mutual understanding that works for kind of everybody, and that makes us actually have strong stewards who are going to be respected and who are going to really be able to defend cases and know the contract of the work sites. Right. So I think also training up, those individuals who want to become stewards is key, very important. Those are our like true defenders at the work sites, I think. So absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for filling us in on that. And, as we brought up these last couple topics, we're just really supposed to be brief because we have a lot more coming on it. We're not really all there. We ended up talking a lot longer than we wanted to on some of these issues. I mean, we're here for a discussion. We're happy we're having a discussion, but we are running long on time. We were planning on wrapping a bit ago, but we went a little longer on some of these future discussions than we would like to. So we are going to wrap. I don't want to cut anyone off. I saw that it looks like Luke Cerna came in just a minute or two ago and raised his hand. So we were trying to wrap. We're not trying to cut you off. So if you got anything before we end, Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make one quick comment. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Just on laps, that I think two important things to put in the equation are thinking about where there are work sites that don't have any stewardship representation, because I think a lot of those people are probably going to feel like, yeah, they need somebody there to help support them. And then not getting into this place of, well, we want to build up our stewardship program, and we don't want to get into this place where we have a work site that's got 10 stewards and then we just want to bump it up to 20. So I think it gets to the point of just trying to lay out so that we have that coverage across the whole state. We're not, and thinking about some of those other factors to make sure that we have good coverage and everyone has somebody to turn to. And even some of these, I run into a lot of these really small work sites where there's just nobody there, there's nobody to talk to. So making sure that we, even if it means that you have maybe a steward coming over from another work site that can kind of help support that work site because they don't have anyone yet. So just other things to keep in mind. I didn't want to go too long, but just more to keep in mind as we figure out things when it comes to the LAPS program and how we expand that.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Good insight. And, I definitely see that as a very worthy, maybe phase 2 type strategy. I think, in my opinion, the first things we should worry about are all the people who've applied who have not gotten in. Definitely need to be the first round of approvals. But you're right. I'm right there with them is all the work sites that don't have. And some of those, there are overlap, right? There's overlap in those two things. So I'm going to pass it over to Frank to give us a recap of what we talked about and get us out of here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope we, shed some light on the latest developments, the board meeting, the side letter negotiations, and keep in mind, we'll be having longer length discussions in the next few episodes on the future of telework and the union's involvement in that, as well as stewardship, membership, and the LAPS program. So hopefully Annika can join in future episodes to shed more light on that. And we welcome anyone who wants to rejoin next episode to let us know. And if you're listening and weren't able to take part in this episode, make sure to email us at Gmail. We're at talkshop1000@gmail.com.